In this lesson, we're going to composite our reflections over our background and our foreground. So here's where we left off, and as always, you'll be able to find these inside of our project files, After Effects files. I'm just saving these out as we move along through this project. Okay, so now we need to composite this reflection onto our background and foreground. So let's begin by just grabbing our reflection layer and let's pull it right above our picture frame, which is the background layer. Now you'll notice that we made a little mistake inside of our 3D application. The reflection is not exactly lined up with our background. And that's actually a pretty common occurrence. It's very difficult to get pixel perfect accuracy when working in a 3D application. So instead of going back to our 3D application and having to make an entire re-render, let's just come in and fake and distort our reflection to match. Reflections are usually something we can get away with quite a lot, actually. And because of this case, our reflection is centered, or the center line pretty much stays in the middle of our object the entire time, we can do something like a basic scale. So I'm going to hit the S key to grab my scale tool, and let's just increase this reflection by a little bit. Now we don't want to go too high, so let's try typing in something like maybe 1.3. Let's take a look here. I'm not seeing any more green, so that's good. Now we might also want to just move this up 1 or 2 units. Let's double check that the bottom does not break. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this corner here, and I would still like this corner to be roughly aligned with our background. Now later on, our reflection turns very dark and it becomes very difficult to tell the shape of our reflection. So although on this last frame it is not lining up with our background footage, we're not really worried about it because we need it to line up here at the beginning. Okay, so now that we have that finished, I think I'm actually just going to keep the reflection as a layer on top of our background. If we wanted to, we could set the reflection as a screen mode and then use something else to cut out our background, but really I kind of like the dark reflection look. It really draws the focus to our foreground element, and so I think I'm just going to keep this reflection on top. So now let's composite this reflection over our foreground, because as we saw earlier, part of our girl is actually behind the so-called glass. So I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate our reflection layer, and let's bring this up again towards the top. Now if you recall earlier, we created this reflection matte to cut out our reflection in areas where it's not needed. So let's bring up our transfer controls again, and we want an alpha inverted matte. If we do an alpha matte, we keep our reflections on top of our face, but really we want an alpha inverted matte to keep the reflections on the bottom. Now for these reflections, I do want to blend them in somehow, so depending on what we're doing, we can either use a screen mode, which lightens the background, or we can keep it at normal, but hit the T key to bring down its opacity or its transparency. Now I think I'm going to use the transparency because later on, when we have this very dark background, the screen mode is not going to change colors pretty much at all. So I want to make sure that we still have this color change, so in this case I'm going to go with a transparency reflection. Now again, this is not exactly physically accurate, but it is my preferred method for selling this shot we currently have. Okay, so let's see what we need to do now. We essentially have the basic composite set up and ready to go. And if we hit the 0 key, we can see we have a pretty nice composition so far. However, we have introduced a pretty big glaring error. And you can see this on the right side of our screen where this thumb is. Now if you look at the beginning of our sequence, you can see we're now cutting off our thumb, which is something that is really easy to do when we're doing this kind of complex 3D, 2D integration. And it's something we need to look out for and definitely fix, because this is completely breaking the illusion right now. So in the next lesson, let's come in and take a look at how we're going to extract out this alpha information using keyers, and then how we're going to cut out our reflection using that information to reintroduce our thumb. So just a quick recap, in this lesson we took a look at how we can combine our reflection both with our background and with our foreground, and we looked at how to deal with various issues while doing both of those operations.